Title: The New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and Art Beyond Sight present Project Access New York City, Best Practices for Inclusion in the Arts, Thursday, May 2, 2013, the Museum of Modern Art. Title: The Changing Face of the Disability Community. 3 panelists are seated on a stage in an auditorium. From left to right, the panelists are Sonny Bates of Sonny Bates Associates and TED Talks, Aimee Mullens, athlete, fashion icon, actor, advocate, and design innovator, and Piotr Adamczyk, program manager at the Google Cultural Initiative. Sonny Bates speaks first.
About 15 years ago, I was at TED, and there was a magnificent presentation. We were all just bowled over. There was a standing ovation. And then everything got quiet, and then this beautiful woman walked across the stage, and we all thought, oh, this poor woman. It's just, how do you follow something like that? And it was Aimee, and she sat down and she took off her legs. And
not right away.
Yeah, not right away, but soon enough. And I will never underestimate her again. This is a woman who has been breaking boundaries, has been realigning any kind of expectation you would think about disability, about what it means to move through the world as a bilateral amputee. It's sort of unimaginable how she has shifted so many people's thinking. She is a leader in design. She's a leader in how people can think about what it means to not be of full body. I remember one other thing I'm going to share. When she was at a full body, did I really say that? I'm sorry. I remember multiple options, and she'll show us extraordinary legs that people have been designing for her. But I remember at MIT a number of years ago they did the a seminar about human potential, and you and Hugh Hare were there, and you've done a great deal of work on designing for people in prosthetic designing. And the two of you got into this discussion about being able to upgrade your legs. And by the end of this discussion, I thought, I want that. I want to be able to upgrade my knees and my ankles and my feet and my shoes and not ever have to have my feet hurt again.
We all do.
we all do. So Aimee will be sharing with us some photographs and her story, and also her particular view of how she moves through the world and changing minds and perceptions everywhere that she goes. And Aimee's last name is Mullens. Piotr Adamczyk has an amazing job right now and an amazing history. He comes to us because he is the man from the Google Art Project, but it turns out that not only is he working on his PhD in computer science and in library science at University of Illinois, but he's also a card-carrying artist. So he's had a artist in residency at I-Beam and at Banff, which they actually gave him a card that said he's an artist, and in Spain. So he's wandering. He weaves back and forth between, is he a technologist? Is he an artist? How do you live in arguably the world's greatest technology company and work on these incredibly interesting projects that Google does? So we'll be hearing from Piotr. Why don't you set the stage a little bit, and then I would love to have Aimee talk and more personal. So talk a bit about what you're doing. And
well, I ended up, my graduate work was focused on human attention and dealing with issues of cognition and how we handle interruptions. I took that to the arts, strangely enough, thinking about art experiences. And after my graduate school, I ended up at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, working on the website and trying to figure out ways that we could tell compelling and complicated narratives in a very kind of simple and streamlined way. And that's really when that issue of universal access and universal design really started coming into play. I mean, in computer science, we're very used to dealing with building the common case and making that work really fast. But when you're talking about design, and especially when complex narratives are involved, you have to start thinking about when is somebody coming up against this, the use cases and the personas that are involved, and how is it that you're really going to convey this information using a complex interface. And really kind of dealing with those issues and not really carving out niches, but rather seeing everything as a spectrum and saying that the ability that someone has when they're coming to this, whether it's familiarity with the topic, whether it's the ability to see something on the screen, those things are very much part of the same design project that you're working on.
You're particularly talking about the need for simplicity, and that the whole idea of over-featured design and technology, and we all know our phones and our computers do way more than we ever think about it, and one of the challenges with designing.
Well, overwhelming the audience in particular. I mean, certainly at the Met, with 2 million objects in the collection database, we couldn't confront everyone with just throwing 2 million objects at them. And now at the Art Project, we're 230 institutions now. So how is it that you can provide a meaningful experience to such a vast collection and a vast array of material? Focusing on one sense at a time really is often the best way to go about it. One of the things we didn't like at the Met on the website was that it tried to do too much at once. It had the image next to the text, next to audio, next to video, just this omnipresent sort of all at you at the same time. At the Art Project, we've kind of made it a very modal experience where you can zoom in very closely on an image, or you can read the text, or you can move on to a video piece, or you can spend some more time, on additional details. But they don't try to do everything at once, understanding that the experience, you only have so much input that you can really take in. So.
Now, I'm wondering, Aimee, if you want to, you've got a particular view of the world, and people view you in a remarkable way. Do you want to? We've got some slides, I think, right? Do we have a clicker? As it's all set up. Excellent.
Okay. Oh. Well, this was just to show kind of where we were 30 years ago, but really where a lot of the first kind of prosthetics that someone would get still are. I mean, this technology hasn't really changed since Charles Eames bent plywood. That's really how they learned how to do it. It was from prosthetics for the war, for soldiers. So, but I mean, it was kind of like that. These were the early. This was the first design of an energy storing foot. It's woven carbon fiber, but it's still, a prosthetic historically is about replacing loss, and any kind of attempt made to build a prosthetic was about trying to replicate in the most simplistic way a human leg or arm, right? So I mean, literally, it's like a stick with a hook. It's a stick with a foot. So you can still see that that's kind of the aim here. This was the next generation, still a shin with a foot, but it's at least a shock absorber and a spring, so that the compression that someone like me would take on the knees, the hips, lower back is mitigated a little bit. And this was the prototype. This is something that I think everyone in the room is probably familiar now. But in 1995, it was me, the only person in the world, the first person in the world, trying these out and working with them and working on the design of these, which were modeled after the hind leg of a cheetah. I was trying to be the fastest woman on the planet with prosthetic legs, and it was kind of, as a naive teenager, the idea was, well, if I don't have to have human legs below the knee, why are we looking at them? Why? What's the shin and foot fixation? Why can't we look at the fastest thing that runs, right? So from a very naive seedling, an idea comes something that revolutionized not only prosthetic but also design, because this is an object that engages people. It engages the imagination. It changes the conversation. It allows people to feel more free in asking questions, and it allows the user to feel that they have more authorship over their body and the identity implications that go along with that. This is me running at the Big East Championship. Ed up here, Ed was the lawyer up here before, and he was, Ed, if you're still in the room, I'm also a Hoya, proud Hoya. Me running against like the next FloJoes of the world right before my leg came off, 180 meters into the 100-meter race, which was not fun. That was me setting a world record in the long jump. to this day, I still have to sit on one side of my my behind because of landing wrong in a sand pit with those legs. That sort of, they acted like skis, and my tailbone took the brunt of it. This is Coney Island. Who'd have thunk it? Do you know what I mean? The beauty of Photoshop. Incredible. Broken, like beer cans and bottles are just gone. And it was December. This was December.
Really
There was
cold.
somebody right off, out of frame with like holding a blanket. And then this happened right after this my first TED talk in 1998, which I had nothing prepared. TED, it's become a different animal. TED right now they go online and they're shared with the world, which is extraordinary. Back then, it was a free ticket to Monterey, California, and I had a history exam on Friday, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to take this ticket to California. And this kind of started everything because traditionally, International Design, this magazine had, I think it was the first human on the cover. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like Jonathan Ives' new iMac or Philippe Starck's new chair. So the idea that I think what really happened at that TED conference was this very direct humanizing of who designers design for, and the fact that with the internet and this rapidly changing landscape of the interconnectivity of knowledge and experience, people's the hacking that happens in your workshop, in your garage, in your basement, doesn't die with you. It's shared. So this, I think, was definitely a seminal moment, and it was a great graphic designer, Peter Saville, had a profile in that magazine, and he gave that cover to Alexander McQueen and Nick Knight, and it kind of, started another adventure where I realized after this success with Running Legs that I had been historically talking to the wrong people. I was talking to people with medical background about my legs, who were trained to think of me in terms of this loss, and the need to replace loss and what would never be there and what could never happen. And then you go to a guy who worked at Madame Tussauds Wax Museum, and he's not thinking of loss; he's thinking of opportunity. And that started a whole other adventure, especially again as a young woman. Conversations around body image. I mean, everything we see in advertising, certainly geared towards women, is manipulated anyway, and full of prosthetic in other in other ways.
Shopping
in other ways,
it looks the same. Yeah.
So this was this idea of kind of exploring with Alexander McQueen what is fashionable. What is fashionable? What's and actually, I remember when this came out in 1998, September of 1998. I remember being on the Upper West Side in a bookstore, not a bookstore, like a deli with magazine stand, and some guy was in there with his girlfriend, and that was there, and he said, "Dude, look how they photoshopped those legs onto her, man." And I was like, that's me, and that's real, and so again, it was just it started to be fun. These are hanging. This is in the Tate in London. Again, this is just playing and kind of creating the idea of creating an opportunity to explore something that had sort of a morose context in our society as something that could be covetable, beautiful, at the very least, a starting point for a conversation about a shared human experience. Because this idea of otherness is, I think we're rapidly understanding that it's what everyone always thought was other, whether it's the LGBT community, disabilities, it's us. It's us. It's we. And certainly when it comes to something like, those were hand carved out of ash that Alexander McQueen made. That was in the Met 2 years ago. Again, that really kind of sealed the deal on having people who never in a million years would have said, I kind of wish I had prosthetic legs so I could have Alexander McQueen make them for me.
Wear those shoes.
So I could wear that, yeah.
Wear those boots,
and pick your height and have ankles that you wouldn't have genetically inherited, which my grandmother reminds me all the time. I would have never inherited. I mean, this is like, so I'm a very tame sort of 5'8" and a half, 5'9" today, but this, I have legs that make me very tall. And this was a project, took over 2 years really to film, but Matthew Barney, the exploration, again, this was actually filmed, that was shot in the Guggenheim, as I'm sure you can tell. But these legs were, everyone thinks they're glass. They're optically clear polyurethane, which is a bowling ball material, basically. It's 10 pounds, very heavy. That's a close-up there. I think those are in the Chicago Museum of Art now. But, the functionality of, I don't know here who in the room got to see this Cremaster, but occasionally was playing it. Two people were like, yes, that was me. God, what an athletic feat, right? To sit through 3.5 hours of no dialogue. I had the one word in the film. But these were legs that Matthew cast in soil with potatoes and a root system growing in it and beet greens growing out of the top, if you can see. With an amazing, it's incredible, this big gold toe at the bottom that I had to use because in this Celtic mythology of Finn McCool, who's kind of a legend, well, not even kind of a legend in Ireland, like a legendary hero, a fictional hero, weaving the tartan for the McCool clan. So I actually had to learn how to spin yarn and weave a 5-finger braid on this. But I was standing in the Cairo Museum a couple years ago, and it was long after they had assembled what they found from Hatshepsut's tomb, the only female pharaoh of Egypt. And there was a woman that they thought was Hatshepsut's nurse who, was in her early 60s, which in ancient Egyptian times means you were really, really, really old. You survived a lot. And she had lost her big toe. On her right leg, they think to basically diabetes, and she had a prosthetic gold. It was gold and linen. The linen was dipped repeatedly in gold, and I sat there looking in this glass sarcophagus. I was so moved to see that here I thought, a lot of times I felt quite alone in forging this path of trying to elevate something like prosthetics, into a place of art by working with people who aren't in the medical community. And here was this woman from 5,000 years ago and you could see on the bottom of the toe, it was worn. You could see the linen fibers. She rocked this gold toe. She loved it. She was rocking this prosthetic toe. This was, it took 14 hours to get into this character, but that's, articulated paws, and literally not just an homage to the cheetah sprinting legs, but also, that's kind of the finished product. But the tail moved, which was there was some guy hiding back there behind the post with a cable thing, and he made the tail swish. This is a close-up of another pair of legs that Matthew made. This was again, the idea that even taking it further, that if we're going to look at the parts of the body as wearable sculpture, that they don't even need to be we don't need to be functional. Everything in prosthetics is about form follows function, right? Aesthetic is absolutely an afterthought. And I was trying to put the aesthetic argument front and center to stimulate ideas around functionality. This is Hugh Herr, who Sunny mentioned. Hugh runs the biomechatronics lab at MIT Media Lab, and he is one of the world's great mountain climbers, and was trapped in an avalanche some years ago and lost both legs, but survived. Other climbers lost their lives in that. And he now builds legs, where he can extend them, and the feet are like ice picks, so he can wedge his feet into rock cracks. So, and these legs would be the next generation of the cheetah. These would not be sanctioned for competition because they have a motor in them. They'd be really fun to run in. And these are the legs that Hugh has designed with his company iWalk. They're called the Biome. It's a bionic leg. So bionic technology recognizes biological function and then augments it. So when I have that's a battery pack in the back, which they're trying to streamline this look, and I kind of love this sort of winged Mercury thing that's happening with these legs. So and literally there was a horrible Caucasian, I put that in nasty quotation marks because it's like the color of Big Bird, foot shells that were on these gorgeous things, like hiding all that. I cut them off, but my cousin's 5-year-old said to me, and we were looking at people's feet, and his father's from Buenos Aires, and he's like, and Daddy's feet are this color, and Mommy's feet are this color, and Amy's feet are yellow. I was like, not anymore. I'm cutting them off. That's exactly all I needed to know. Speaking of yellow, it actually looks very. These are the legs I wore into opening ceremonies for the London Games last year. Sort of an homage to the Olympics of not even just sort of, but this was our first time to incorporate metallic pigment into silicone. So that's all inlaid silicone with a gold laurel leaf. So, and they're actually on display in London right now for a gallery show all about. And this is all different artists who've incorporated, whether it's jewelers or fashion designers who work in molded leather, but it's prosthetics is sort of the baseline. It's the jumping off point. So you can even see on the upper shelf there's a piece done by a jeweler named Bethany Vernon. It's called the Minerva, and it's a neck brace, but it's in sterling silver. And if you're going to have to wear something from whatever it was that was horrible enough to have to make you wear a neck brace, have it be beautiful. Have it be a piece of jewelry. So, I mean, this is something that I think is, 15 years ago, 17 years ago, when I kind of started in the public eye, was really radical. That response, that first TED Talk was radical. Well, now I run around Central Park with woven carbon fiber, and nobody presumes deficiency. They ask me where the rocket boosters are, and they want to know where are the rocket boosters, and I have to disappoint them by admitting that I can't fly yet, and I don't have them. That's a long way in 15 years.
It's a long way
for perception. Yeah.
When we were talking yesterday, you were talking about the sort of design and the simplicity of design, but this idea of a sort of a minimum, or you were talking about the lowest common denominator, and what you said was each disability is different, and that you think in terms of the way you are navigating the space and how you move around, and which is very different from someone missing an arm, from a sight, from hearing. And so when you think about the design constraints, as you have, Peter, when talking about for many or for an individual, and how do you think about this? We talked about spectrum as well, so talk about that a little bit, can you?
Well, no, I mean, lowest common denominator just wouldn't work in many cases. That if you average everyone down to that, no one really would be satisfied with the experience. And that's where spectrum kept coming up, that everyone needs a degree of augmentation. Everyone needs a degree of affordance. And accounting for that in the design is just better design. It's not as if you're doing this because it's mandated or because you have to accommodate one particular kind of disability or another. It's very much more about just making what you would be doing anyway, but just making it better for everyone. And in doing so, you're accommodating the broadest possible group. And I think that's where that augmentation comes in, and the fact that we could always use augmentation of whatever perceived or real deficiency we might have.
Well, and also the fact that technology has become prosthetic for anybody. I mean, you don't if you leave home without your phone, your smartphone, you feel
your memory's gone,
limited. Yes, you.
I don't know my kid's phone number.
It's truly that's like the modern disability. It's like I have nothing. I don't have a calendar. I have no way to contact people. I don't have my maps. This is the reality that this is, in the way that scissors would be the implement you need to cut something.
Or glasses.
Yeah,
Or
everything.
obviously with
Clothes, shoes. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? To protect your feet from the environment. I mean, how we think about assistive medical gear can really, you have to understand that this is everybody. If it's you, it's going to be you. If it hasn't already been, it will be at some point in your life.
Yeah, especially when it comes to issues of perception, when it comes to cultural heritage objects. I mean, there's always issues of, this is very simple stuff. When the quality of the image that you see on the screen and whether or not that actually accurately represents the images, the pigment that's on the canvas, for example. The lighting conditions in the galleries. All of those things, of course, change the perception of the piece incredibly, right? Mm-hmm. And we try to account for it in monitor calibration and so on, but right away you see that the experience that you have is mediated by any level of technology, and how do we account for that in the experiences that people have?
Back to this this question of good design, and great design is including thinking about people in not only in the broadest possible terms, but also as individuals. How close is that to being a reality? You've talked about in the last 15 years that the perception of you as you move through the world and are this lightning rod for people to think about any kind of disability differently. How and you mentioned the kids in Central Park. How mainstream do you feel like it is right now, where people are saying that could be me, that will be me? The fact that she's running on carbon fiber is no different from how I am without my glasses, or if I'm in a bad pair of high heels, or if I'm on crutches, or if I'm in a wheelchair temporarily. Do you feel like people are seeing themselves, identifying themselves in a way that will be part of their life?
I think that there's been, it's kind of the exponential leap. I feel like every year there's a greater understanding. Again, when I'm talking about disability, I'm also talking about, I'm thinking of it in terms of otherness, right? Because you're just saying that there are a lot of people out there who don't self-ascribe to being part of a disabled community. I didn't. Yeah. I never have. Now, granted, also my limitations on mobility are not what they would be if I had to use a wheelchair. And for me, like, walking up the ramp of the Guggenheim is fine. Walking down the ramp is, an adventure. If you ever see somebody weaving back and forth, they probably don't have facility of their ankles to bend on the ramp on the way down. That would be me. But I've from a very early age, and actually, I remember reading something once that Quincy Jones said about just minorities in general, that the biggest asset you have as being a member of a minority group is that you learn how to adapt to the majority. It's a life skill, that I've always seen as an asset. But I think what we're also recognizing is that in the same way we have with the work towards gender equity in the last certainly 4 decades, since I'm thinking about Title IX and the women's movement in this country. When you understand that for so long, men that were considered exceptional were competing against 50% of the population. It's and we realize now that we're just all better for having more people in the workforce, more people in our government who have different perspectives, and that's what we're talking about here when we think about our audience, is that we're trying to understand that there are consumers that maybe haven't felt included and invited. So the whole idea of inclusiveness makes for better all around, as we've seen.
Well, it's empathy and adaptability. If the time that we take to translate the content or even the interface, just by some happenstance of geography, if someone's born in a different country and doesn't happen to speak English, that they can't use the tool. It seems just as reductive and wrong to limit that audience as it would be to anyone else. So I think it's a matter of empathizing what the experience might be, regardless of what the limitation is, and how it is that you can put yourself in that place.
I'm sure we've got questions from the audience. We've got two amazing resources here. So anybody have a question? That we'll keep on talking among ourselves because we've got over in there. Do you have a? Yeah, great. Do we have a mic?
Oh, I was just curious. Are there prosthetics for swimmers? Have you seen athletes in other sports doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many. I got to see, at the Olympic Stadium this past summer for the Paralympic Games. Unfortunately, you didn't get to see much of that here in the United States, but the rest of the world broadcast it. Yeah, I mean, it's actually incredible because the United States, in my mind, had always been a leader in any kind of diversity and inclusion issue, and I feel like we were surpassed last year, absolutely. Also, when you look at the coverage, the media coverage of Paralympic sport, it was, you couldn't see a headline in this country about it without the word inspirational, and that word's been cheapened for me. It's really cheap because the real word has to do with infusion of energy. To inspire has to do with the breath, life force. You inspire. You infuse life force. You are moved. If something made you feel warm and fuzzy for 5 minutes, then you weren't inspired. And quite frankly, somebody running 100 meters in 10 seconds on prosthetic legs, that belongs on the sports page.
Yes, that's mind-blowing. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, with
yeah.
swimming prosthetics, they actually do. A lot of swimmers swim without prosthetics that I noticed, But for me, I actually designed a pair of legs when I was in the 2nd grade as part of a project on marketing. We had to make a product and market it. And I did it on a cereal box, but it was a leg that had a fin that was locked.
I could see you with fins.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it had fins that you could sort of lock into a foot shape that when you could so you could walk out of the ocean. But then once, if you wanted to go back in, you could turn the key and the little foot bit would come back down and be part of the long fin.
Those would be outlawed too.
Why not? It's a good advantage.
Sunny, might I just ask a question to Peter? Peter,
Absolutely.
you once described to me some things that you as an artist and designer kind of were thinking about that could be of help to the cultural community, but they were things that you were over at Google thinking about for the broader population of all of us Americans in general. Might you describe some of those ideas that are, burgeoning? And then the question to Aimee as well, as an artist and a designer, are you toying around with, any ideas that you think we would find interesting as people who are looking to service at cultural organizations?
Well, I think it's about access to cultural experiences, and distance education is something that we're really working on. Again, the reality of it is that, 230 public institutions now are part of the project, 44 different countries. It's not very likely that we'll all be able to travel there, let alone, even within the U.S., to visit all the institutions that are already part of the project, and thinking about ways that we can provide compelling cultural heritage experiences to rural, remote, homebound populations, lifelong learners. Again, thinking about universal access in the broadest possible sense. The limitations that we're sending in a trolley, the Street View trolley, into these museums and providing an experience at the institution when there is no staff there and you can just walk through the galleries on your own. These kinds of experiences are the ones that we want to provide to people, and finding ways to do that for the diverse amounts of content and diverse kinds of content is something else that we're really interested in looking at.
Ideas about
Art and
access?
design.
Oh, art and design.
Things you're working on right now that you want to share.
Well,
That would be interesting.
gosh, there are so many. I mean, there's really so many. I mean, there are a couple designs of legs that I worked on with Alexander McQueen that didn't happen. Never came to fruition. But Sarah Burton and I have talked about resurrecting some of those. One is Nymphenburg porcelain, which at first, when the first time Lee approached me about this, I was like, porcelain? It's like, it's going to crack under the weight of me. I'm going to, and it's going to be horrible. And actually, it's an incredibly durable material, and Nymphenburg makes the porcelain for the royal families and other people and who buy exquisite porcelain, and those are I love the idea. Jacques d'Amboise is one of our great legendary dancers. He's in his 80s now. We have talked about this idea of doing a dance project. I can move, but I'm not a dancer in any way, but I would love to learn the tango. And I would love to do an experiment with the tango where I do the dance in lots of different kinds of legs that have different materials, like how I feel in the wooden legs versus, the ones that look like glass versus porcelain. I mean, the interaction, the tango is such a forceful dance, and there's such interaction. All right. Uh-oh. I'm saying this out loud. This is hubris. But the idea of the negotiation with the ground is something that, for me, is always imagined. The way I think about walking on gravel versus sand versus grass versus, carpeting versus polished marble. It all starts up here, So it's very real to me, but it is all imagined. And that is, to your point about mobile distance education. I mean, there is. It's almost like a return to something that people did for centuries. Is using more of the facilities we have already to have an experiential success. With a conversation with an object or somebody's work of art.
I love this. You reminded me we were talking about mobile, because Peter, you were talking about some of the augmented reality, some of the mobile experiences that we could lay on top of the traditional physical museum experience that people would be able to customize. Can you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, thinking about making it much more pervasive. We started with goggles. It's the mobile image search technology that Google has, where you can take a photograph with your phone and it'll tell you what it is that you're looking at. So we do it for art objects as well. So you can't, a bus drives by with a painting on the side, or a book cover, or a snippet, a part of a collage or something like that. You take a photograph, it lets you know where that object comes from and who made it and the history of it and so on. But thinking about how to do that now in the quickly advancing kind of augmented reality sense, overlaying art in more everyday experiences and thinking about ways that we can augment what otherwise would be a normal experience into something that has more cultural kind of heritage resonance to it. Bringing out the history of a space, bringing out the art around us, walking through the city in New York and realizing how many other museums there are that we haven't been to. Just simple things like that. But again, going back to this issue of augmentation, whether it be memory or physical capacity or whatever it happens to be, that finding room for technology and design to augment and supplement the things that we want in our everyday life.
Now, have you done any projects with any of the cultural institutions you're working with thus far, like this that you're describing?
We've done a bit with goggles, both for the Met and the Getty, with vast parts of their collections. I think there's also, the museum in Cincinnati has also done some interesting work on in-gallery augmented reality kind of iPad tours, where you pop up an iPad and it tells you what's on the wall and it shows you interesting parts of the painting in a way that wall labels could probably do the same, but there's a different experience when it's mediated and there's more content there. So again, just more.
And can it read to you as well?
It can.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
So
of course. And yeah, of course, there's automatic translation and text-to-speech and all of those kinds of issues that come into this, and multilingual aspects as well. Those are some of the more interesting ones, actually, in terms of trying to accommodate different languages, not just the fact that there hasn't been a written transcript, but there hasn't been a written transcript in all of the different languages that people actually speak.
Amazing. Other questions? Okay, we've got lots now. So whoever has the microphone is going to be in charge of who goes next, I think. So we've got one right here, and then you.
I'm Flori Siri from the Manhattan Theater Club. Peter, do you have any thoughts about addressing how someone with a cognitive impairment could experience a wordy play, for instance, in an audience with the rest of the public?
I think it depends on the amount of augmentation they'd be okay with. I think that the experience, if it was something that As an audience member, you mean? Like specifically? Yeah, I think it would have to be something, I keep thinking of assistive listening devices in movies and things like that. But to do it in a way that, whether it be through glass or a project like that, or even an auditory only experience, I think that might be interesting. I know that there's been some experiments with autistic audiences and theater, and whether or not there might be some sort of relationship there in terms of thinking about how the mind processes social experience and narrative, and how that might be perceived through technology differently than it would be. Scene recognition, where my mind is going, is kind of understanding what's going on in front of us. For a machine is very different than what a person perceives. So it'll be, person A and person B are interacting for a given amount of time, and this is maybe what's being discussed and the implications. For the machine, it's very easy to process that and translate it into something that maybe somebody with an impairment could perceive differently or better than the complex social interactions, which may seem foreign or alien to some people. So that the machine might actually be able to help in that case. But that's where my mind goes right away.
Fascinating.
Hi, I'm Aimee Fiore from Tada Youth Theater. I was curious if there's anything that, just in thinking about website accessibility, is there anything that currently exists, apps or things on the market that we could be applying to our websites right now that could make them more accessible?
There's certainly plugins for most browsers that can accommodate high contrast presentations of material. The trouble sometimes, though, is the sites aren't designed with the appropriate tags behind them so that they don't look quite right. That it's very kind of posterized and only certain parts of text actually make it through that filter. But yeah, there's a couple of translator plugins that do that fairly well. But I can't think of any that do it consistently, and it really does depend on the site that you're visiting more than the tool that you're using. But there are automatic tagging solutions that you can send your own code through, your own website through, to actually add those ADA hyperlink tag, hypertext code to your site and so on. But we can certainly follow up after.
Sounds great. Got another question here in the white jacket.
Hi, I'm Yvette Campbell, Executive Director of Harlem School of the Arts. I had the fortune, while I was working at Ailey, to work with children with limb loss, and we actually offered them a dance class at that time. Do you work with children now, Aimee, and is there any options for children who want to move, who want to dance, to get these maybe not Alexander McQueen legs, but legs that move for them to stay in shape, to stay healthy, to be empowered and enriched and inspired by your story, but to actually dance and actually bring that into their lives as well, or move or high jump, either one.
Well, so I don't work with children specifically. I mean, I'm an actress now, so it's like but to your point, after the Boston bombings a couple weeks ago, a woman who's an ultra marathoner who is also a amputee below the knee, a single amputee below the knee. We really, knew that we had to do something, and the kids we basically secured prosthetics and the care for the kids that became amputees, which is fantastic because there's a lot of money that's been raised, but the money needs to go to buying insurance plans because. I finally got insurance through SAG 2 years ago for the first time as an adult. I never had insurance, and even if I did, none of my legs would be covered. They're not. Nothing I have is considered medically necessary. Not even your basic. When I say basic, I'm talking about the shock absorber in the spring, which is was radical 20 years ago, and now it's really basic. So, for me. Yes, I went through this whole transition where you start with wooden legs and you get to the basic carbon fiber, and then I sort of, like I said, it was exponential from there. It was like I just wanted, and I did. I was the guinea pig. I went after anything I could get my hands on and traded the press I could bring the designer for that. But, my body took the heat for it, took the results. But kids today are immediately going on to these woven carbon fiber, and I met a little girl from Brooklyn a couple years ago who was born with what they call, it's a neurofibromatosis. It's brittle bone disease, right? So her one leg was 7 centimeters shorter than the other, and she was 5 at the time. She'd had way too many surgeries for any 5-year-old to do leg lengthening, and her parents sort of knew at the age of 5 they were going to stop and sort of examine where technology had come in 5 years to see what, if they were going to continue down this road. And in fact, what she beat them to it. She went on the internet, she Googled new leg. And came up with dozens of images of mine, and printed them out and took him into school and did her kindergarten show and tell with all these fabulous, fantastical legs, and came home and said to her parents, I want to get rid of my bad leg. When can I get a new leg? She was 5. There was none of the psychological attachment to, cellular tissue and skin and bone that we sort of always imposed, right? It was like, for her, it was about, this doesn't work. And, and really the thing for her, the touch point for her was fashion. I mean, this was an incredibly precocious child, incredibly physical. When I met her 3-year-old brother was like tackling her. She was tackling him. She was incredibly capable in her body. And she wore a brace, right? But they were only, her real thing was she loved dressing up. And there were only 2 shoe companies in the world that produced children's shoes that they could have modified to the extent of adding this kind of to make it work with the brace. And it was really, it was the only thing in her life that reminded her on a daily basis that there was limitation. And she, 6 months later, the mother called me. They had made this decision with her. They were going to amputate. And incredibly for me, because it was the foot that was the issue, that they were going to amputate through the ankle, which is called a Symes amputation. And I realized, if she did that, if they did that kind of amputation, she wouldn't be able to get all the legs that she
fell in love with.
Yes, because there's no room to put a shock absorber or a spring. So this was 2011. At no point did the surgeon have a conversation with the man who was going to be making her legs, the prosthetist. Not one. Because for the surgeon, this was failure. To not save the limb was failure. For the prosthetist, this is opportunity. It's a blank slate. He can create anything in that space between where her leg ends and the ground. So they did amputate further up the leg so that she could have much more opportunity for different legs. And 4 months after the amputation, I was at the Tribeca Film Festival. They have a family street fair. And I feel this tug on my shirt. And I look down, and there she is with face paint and, paint in her hair. And she immediately hiked up her jeans leg to show me this bubblegum pink leg with red sequined Mary Janes shoes on them. And bubblegum pink with the characters of High School Musical 3 on it. And she was running around and completely... It was just, this was, it took me to my 20s to get there, to get to that point of inviting people to look and feeling not beautiful in spite of, but because of, feeling like I had a rich life because of these experiences with prosthetics. This child was there at 6.
It's amazing when you talk. I keep thinking about this idea of really redefining normal, and that you've got.
What is normal?
Well, yeah. I think that's exactly it. Normal, somehow all of your limbs are intact, and it's all cellular, and because it's a failure if the surgeon has to amputate, and that you and people like this young woman and people who are viewing themselves as normal, not as limited, not as disabled, and that it's our job, the rest of us, to make sure that we are thinking about people as normal being inclusive in every conceivable way, and as when we are thinking about accessibility, accessibility is the right thing to do because it's about including everybody, and in that way we will have a much stronger, better experience for all of us. So I think this is it. I thank you so much, and thank the two of you. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Title: www.projectaccessforall.org. Copyright Project Access for All 2013.